Okay, everybody, we're going to work through a couple of business problems involving percentages to start to see the way this might come up in your work life, in your work world, and to see the different traps we need to watch for to make sure that we know what we're doing, what numbers to put where, because again, you're mostly going to use a calculator for the actual math, but you have to understand what it is you're trying to find and how you get there, okay? And first, we're going to look at rate of change. And we see that a company's profit increased from 50,000 last year to 62,000 this year. And we're looking for the percent of increase. So we're looking for percent, which we know is going to be rate. So we come over here, we can make our triangle for this one. And this is what we're looking for, right? We're looking for that. Okay, in order to find percent increase, our first step is we have to find the amount of increase. That is always going to be the first step to finding the percent of increase, is you have to start with the amount. And looking here, I realize that's math you can do in your head easily, but let's write it out so we can see all the steps. We had 62,000 this year. We had 50,000 last year. If you subtract those out, you have a $12,000 increase. Okay? Now, this $12,000 that it went up is not the whole, right? That's our portion. We've gone up $12,000. Now, here's where you need to pay attention to what you're doing, because you have two numbers left here. You've got 50,000 and 62,000, and one of those is your base. Okay, for this, we're going to start with, because we want to know what the increase was from last year to this year. So last year's amount is our base for this problem. So what you do is what you always do. You can cover this up and you see your math problem there. What you need to do is divide 12,000 by 50,000, and you see that you get 0.24. And we know, because we're looking for percent, we need to express it as such. So that's going to move this decimal 2 places to the right, and the percent increase was 24%. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Now we're looking for the sales for the second week. Okay, we're looking at finding the new amount after a change. We had weekly sales of 28,000. We can go ahead and put this in the triangle, what information we have. Our base is 28,000. The next week's sales increased by 6%. So we have our rate. What are the sales for the second week? Now, this is where we're going to get a little tricky and have to make sure that we use rational thought to see if the answer we think we've gotten for a problem is correct. Because the portion we find here is not going to be the sales for the second week. What it's going to be is the increase. This is going to be the increase, okay? Because if you go to your calculator, remember this 6% has to become a 0.06 to work with it in a mathematical equation. We're going to do 0.06 times 28,000, and what we're going to find we get is 1,680, okay? But don't confuse yourself and stop there and think that's the answer to your problem. Because if sales were 28,000 this week and they went up, then they can't be that much less. So all you have to do to round out this problem is take last week's sales and add the increase to them. And you see that your sales for the second week were 29,680. Okay, now, this one may seem a little different to you because we're going to find the original amount. We're looking for the base here, okay? And we see that we had a 20% increase, okay, to get us to what we're looking for. We sold 54 units today. Now, it's going to seem strange to you that 54 is your portion because it's going to be bigger than what we find here. But you can still set it here, except you have to realize one thing. This 20% is no longer actually 20%. Remember this step that we need to do here, because yesterday's units sold were 100% of units sold. 54 units sold today is 100% of today's units sold. Okay, so yesterday, whatever we sold, that was 100% of that. Today, it went up 20%. So we have 100% from yesterday plus 20% increase. So our percentage is actually 120%. And as long as you remember that step, you can still use your triangle for these kind of problems. Okay, but you have to remember, if you're seeing an increase and you have the new amount with the increase, that you have to add 100% to whatever the percentage is of the increase. So what you're going to have, see, is 54 divided by 1.2. And if you go and do that on your calculator, you see that the answer is 45. Yesterday, you sold 45. You had a 20% increase, and you come to 54. And if you feel like, I confused myself, I want to double check, what you do is start with this as your base and go to your 20% as your rate and multiply it out, and you're going to see that you get 9. And if you add 45 and 9, you get your new amount of units you sold today, 54. Okay? If those kind of problems give you a little pause because you think, I'm not sure I thought that through properly, you can go back and check it that way. It's always good to double check that what you're doing is making sense, because as you're learning, these things can be a little bit confusing. Okay, we have one more thing to look at. This is percentage points versus percentage change. And you have to watch this, percentage points versus percent change, because they sound very similar, but they give you very different numbers with the same statement. This statement, customer satisfaction rises from 65% to 80%. And A is asking, what is the increase in percentage points? Now, in order to find the increase in percentage points, literally all you do is subtract, and you get 15. And that's it. That's all there is to percentage points. There are 15 increased percentage points. Now, percent increase is different. To calculate percent increase, step 1, you have to find the difference, which you've already done. Find the difference. And the difference is 15. Okay? Now, what you need to do is divide the increase by the original value. Let me write this down so you can see it. Divide increase by original value. And so what is that? That is 15. And if we increased, then that means 65 is the original value. And so if we divide 15 by 65, we get this long 0.2307692. And it's going to go on for a little bit there. That one doesn't really divide out very evenly. But so then the next step is going to say multiply by 100. But the easier thing to remember to do is move, that's actually 4. Move your decimal 2 places to the right. 1, 2. Okay, and there's a 0 here, so we're going to round that. It's going to be 23%. You had a 23% increase. So you start the same way with percent increase versus percentage points. The first thing you do is subtract them, and you find your new difference. Then you take the increase, you take the change, and you multiply it by your starting point. What was your original value? Your original value was 65. And in this case, you get this long decimal point. We're going to round and bring it to 2 so we can have a percentage, okay? So you move it 2 places to the right, and it's 23%. So that is a little different. It's a little complicated. Really, the most complicated thing is making sure you're answering the question correctly. So points is just like points in a game. How many points are we ahead? If they have 80 and we have 65, they're ahead by 15. Okay. Percent change, you have to find a percentage. So that's just something that you need to remember as you work these problems. And there's more information on that in your module. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out.